Good morning, Bill and Dana. We have been combing through this probable cause affidavit, and I think it's important to let the audience know this is not enough to convict someone, but it does meet the legal standard that is required to make arrest.
Well, I could not disagree more with Lawrence, because if they can lay out only what is in this probable cause affidavit, they got a conviction.
Not so fast, Sister Madam Prosecutor Nancy Grace. I'm going to tell you why I 100% disagree with your assessment that this probable cause affidavit includes evidence that can establish a conviction against Kohberger beyond a reasonable doubt. Hi there, I'm Professor Blackmore, and welcome back to my channel. And I find it very interesting that Lawrence Jones, who's not an attorney, knows more than Sister Madam Prosecutor Nancy Grace about how the law works. But let me stay focused, because today I want to cut through all of the TV legal analysis and discuss the real life aspects of what will need to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Kohberger committed the murders as charged, specifically first-degree murder with malice aforethought of the 4 Idaho college students in Moscow, Idaho. And I'll explain what malice aforethought is a little bit later. But I'm going to do what I would do if I were representing this Kohberger defendant against Madam Prosecutor Nancy Grace, since she always wants to play the role of prosecutor-in-chief on every murder case. And while I disagree, if guilty, the guy is an extremely sick individual. And I want to separate what you'll hear on here from all of the things you'll hear on the news and other Alfred Hitchcock, Matlock, cockamamie, gotcha murder TV shows. You know, these same news shows that have left people completely astonished when people like Casey Anthony, George Zimmerman in the Trayvon Martin killing, and recently Kyle Rittenhouse were found not guilty. I mean, as interesting as it may be, does proving that a person was in a house where numerous people run in and out all throughout the day and night, does that prove the person committed the murders? I don't think so. And so when you ponder the question, is a shoe print or a fingerprint on a knife sheath cover, when we really don't know if the actual murder weapon has been found yet to discover if this knife cover matches the murder weapon, or that a resident of the home saw a man with bushy eyebrows in the house? I mean, does any of this prove any of the required elements of murder? Well, that is the real question that I will be answering today. And in my mind, it always goes to what happens at the end of the case when the jury is in the jury room deliberating. And when they're in there, they're deliberating using what we call jury instructions. And you can go back and look at any of the videos that I've done in the recent past on other cases, or even recently the Kyle Rittenhouse case, for example. And I always go to the law books of that particular jurisdiction and pull the pattern jury instructions, which is where the attorneys will go at the end of the case when they will be required to submit to the judge what they think should be in the final jury instructions that the judge will give to the jury. And so I'm going to show you how, while very interesting, the information discovered in the probable cause affidavit does not prove the elements required by Idaho law to prove first-degree murder, malice aforethought against Kohberger, with all due respect to my esteemed sister, Miss Sister Prosecutor Nancy Grace. And to do this, it is only fitting that we look first at the criminal complaint that has been filed by the Latah County prosecuting attorney. And as we can see, there are 5 counts in the criminal complaint. But I want to go to count 2, which is one of the 4 murder counts. And you'll see that the prosecuting attorney is alleging that Kohberger committed first-degree murder, malice aforethought. And each of these counts is identical for each of the deceased victims. And so count 2, for example, states, quote, that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Madison Mogen, a human being, by stabbing Madison Mogen, from which she died, end quote. So now let's look at the pattern jury instruction for this crime in Idaho to see what the prosecuting attorney will need to prove. And so here are the criminal jury instructions approved by the Supreme Court of the state of Idaho. And I'm going to go down to the homicide crimes to find the first-degree murder malice aforethought criminal jury instruction. And it states, quote, in order for the defendant to be guilty of first-degree murder with malice aforethought, the state must prove each of the following. Number 1, on or about a certain date. Number 2, in the state of Idaho. Number 3, the defendant, i.e. here, Kohberger, engaged in conduct which caused the death of the named decedent. Number 4, the defendant acted without justification or excuse. Number 5, with malice aforethought. And how do you prove this malice aforethought? By element 6, in one of the ways listed in the last part of this instruction, but you can kind of see from the criminal complaint that at this time, the prosecuting attorney intends to prove it by establishing that the murder was a willful, deliberate, and premeditated killing. Now, premeditation meaning that Kohberger considered beforehand whether to kill or not to kill, and then he decided to kill, end quote. Now, keep in mind that you will need to prove every single one of these 6 elements. And I agree that some of the things in the probable cause affidavit can go a long way to proving some parts of these elements. I'll say again, you must prove all 6 elements. And while I'm sure the prosecuting attorney has been able to uncover a lot more evidence now that he has Kohberger in custody, and they may have even been able to recover the murder weapon, at this time, all we have to go on is what has been shared thus far in the probable cause affidavit. And let me say right here that probable cause is a different and wholly lesser standard than the beyond a reasonable doubt standard that will be required at the time of trial. Again, at the time of trial, the prosecuting attorney will have to prove each of the elements beyond a reasonable doubt. And in my mind, nothing in the probable cause affidavit proves this element 3 beyond a reasonable doubt, i.e., quote, that Bryan C. Kohberger engaged in conduct which caused the death of any one of the 4 named deceased victims, end quote. And so with all due respect to everybody just going wild about this probable cause affidavit, proving that somebody was in the home at the time of the murders, i.e., you have his shoe print or you have his fingerprint or DNA that you match to his daddy, or you have someone saying they saw someone with bushy eyebrows in the house. None of this proves that Bryan C. Kohberger actually caused the deaths. Now, do I think he did it? Yes. Yes, I do. But you have to show and prove. And none of these salacious details out here on the news proves this element. So let's listen to some more analysis from our esteemed Miss Nancy Grace.
Because look at the DNA. The DNA found on the knife sheath, on the snap part of the knife sheath, on the bed beside a victim, up on the third floor, which would suggest that the knife was unsheathed on the third floor and the first murders occurred on the third floor, not the second floor. That DNA is matched back to that man, Bryan Kohberger's father, to a 99.9998% likelihood. In other words, it's about 1 in a 300 trillion match, a fantastical number. Now, how are you going to explain away that? Pull an OJ and claim, oh, the police planted it there? Not going to work. And another thing in that probable cause affidavit, they watch him at his parents' house. That team had two jobs: keep eyes on the defendant, don't let him get away before he can arrest him, and two, get DNA. They watched him come out of his parents' house around 4 o'clock in the morning. Do you empty your trash at 4 a.m.? And another question, do you take it to your neighbor's dumpster? Because that's what he did. And they went right over there and they got it, and they got something abandoned by the father, like a Kleenex maybe, and they matched it back. You can't fight with that number, people. 99.9998. Yeah, it's his father.
If you look at the timeline, Nancy, this is call for number 4. People have been seeing this. We can find out for what happened at 2 a.m. when the residents arrive home, all the way through up until the murders taking place between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. There is some question about why then the one eyewitness waited 7 to 8 hours before making a call to 911. Do you make anything out of that?
Well, yes, I do make a lot out of that, and that's a big question. But remember, this probable cause affidavit, think of a skeleton, because that's all it is. No skin, no teeth, no eyes, no hair, no emotions. We're going to hear all of that at trial. This is just enough facts in order to get that arrest warrant. And remember, DM, as she is called, Dylan Morganson, in the affidavit, she is practically a child. This is probably the first time she's ever lived away from home. She says she hears one roommate crying, whimpering, and freakily you hear what we believe to be the defendant say, hey, it's okay, I'm going to help you. You know what? That will move any jury. She says she was frozen in shock and went in her room and locked the door. Another interesting thing in this warrant, it states she was in her bedroom on the second floor. Here, before, we thought she was on the bottom floor. This really changes a lot about what we know about these killings. But regarding that time of the day, I want to point out he was around that home in the early morning hours all the way back in June, stalking them, peeping, probably masturbating, watching them, finding his victims.
Now, I do love Nancy Grace more than anybody, because she brings fire when she's talking about these murder cases. But most of the time, she's just saying what prosecutors will say. And I have heard other prosecutors who are previous prosecutors or people who are currently serving as prosecutors say the same thing, that they think that this evidence in this affidavit is a slam dunk. And there is so much talk about things Kohberger did, and people are speculating when they say that he did these things to cover his tracks. And it is all very interesting, but none of it proves any of these 6 elements. Again, being in the same town or having your cell phone ping in the same place or even being seen in the house does not prove element 3, that Bryan C. Kohberger caused the deaths. Now keep in mind that when the jury gets in that room to deliberate, they will be held to answering nothing else other than the questions regarding the 6 elements in the jury instruction. Questions about whether Kohberger's phone pinged around the victim's home will not be in those questions. But you do use the evidence to answer the questions. So on element 6, the question will be, was the murder a willful, deliberate, and premeditated killing? Then the jurors can use the evidence regarding the pinging of the cell phone in the area of the home on the 12 prior occasions to meet the definition of premeditation as defined in the jury instructions. But long before you get to the premeditation question, you must prove element 3, that Kohberger actually caused the death. But let's look at some of these details side by side with our elements of the crime. Now, everyone seems to be excited by the timeline picture that the probable cause affidavit seems to paint of the facts and circumstances surrounding the murders, but nothing in this timeline proves element 3 beyond a reasonable doubt. In addition, a lot was made about the fact that instead of going straight from point A to B and driving back home after the murders had been committed, Kohberger seemed to travel in a roundabout route. And while this is very interesting, when the jury goes back to the jury room to deliberate, this will have no factor on one element of the crime. There was also interesting details about what seems to be eyewitness accounts from one of the residents of the home, identified in the probable cause affidavit as DM, who indicated that her room was on the second floor of the home here, and she saw a man with bushy eyebrows walk past her in the direction of the back sliding glass door. Now, the way the affidavit is written, it states that DM did not state that she recognized the male, but it did not state that she actually did say that she did not recognize him. I mean, it is an odd way of saying whether she knew him or not. And the affidavit also states that a shoe print was found just outside of DM's bedroom on the second floor. And the affidavit states that it is similar to the pattern of a Vans type shoe sole that millions of people wear. And while I'm sure law enforcement has much more evidence now, the affidavit does not state anywhere whether anyone ever saw Kohberger wearing Vans shoes or not. I think people have made that conclusion on their own, but I went back and I read the affidavit several times. It could have said whether someone saw him wearing these types of shoes, and it just does not say that. And even if it did, as previously stated, I think you need more than mere evidence establishing that a particular person was merely in the home when you're dealing with a home that is what is called a party style home where people come in and out at all hours of the day and night. Now, the affidavit also makes reference to a very strong piece of evidence in the form of a knife sheath or cover found in the bedroom on the third floor. And the affidavit indicates that law enforcement were able to match the DNA to the DNA profile of Kohberger's father as a result of trash recovered from Kohberger's family's residence located in Allwrights, Pennsylvania. But, as I stated previously, this evidence does not prove element 3 beyond a reasonable doubt, i.e., that Kohberger caused anyone's death, because we still do not know if law enforcement officials have recovered the murder weapon or not. And until then, you just have DNA of Kohberger at the house on something that cannot yet be established to be connected to the actual murder weapon, which, upon finding, could prove and provide the needed connection to prove element 3, i.e., that Kohberger caused the death of the deceased victims. I mean, I personally think that to prove the element beyond a reasonable doubt in a house that had a reputation for being a party house where it seemed that anybody was invited to run in and out, you would need more than a random fingerprint or DNA found in the house, especially if they do not recover the murder weapon. On the contrary, I think having DNA from Kohberger found on the bodies of one or more of the victims, i.e. underneath their fingernails or on some other part of their body, would be a slam dunk. But as you know on here, I just ask and report, and I'll let you decide. So, what do you think about the evidence described in this probable cause affidavit supporting the request for the arrest warrant? Based on the elements of the crime that will be needed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt at the time of trial, do you think this is enough evidence so far to prove Kohberger's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? Please let me know by leaving your comments in the comment section below. And I hope you'll also give me a big thumbs up. And I hope you'll also consider donating to this video by clicking the super thanks heart button below. And while you're there, I want to also ask that you please subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the bell so you'll be notified whenever I come back with more analysis on this case. And please also follow me on TikTok and Instagram.